Okay, welcome back, everybody. I am going to go over gender. In the last video, we went over sex, and if you're looking for that one before this, then you should go look at sex. And now I'm going to go over gender. So hopefully we'll get through this. This one is a little more narrative driven rather than categorical. So it's a little more complex, more nuanced, and I'm going to try to represent gender theory in the best way possible, and then I'm going to break it apart. So the first thing we need to establish is where gender theorists are correct. They are correct in that there is major overlapping aspects and to many characteristics between the sexes, and we've discussed many of them. And it's true that it's the case, especially when it comes to personality, when it comes to behaviors, and a lot of other things. They overlap to a significant degree. But it does not mean that you can just identify willy-nilly with whichever one that you think more aligns with a particular sex. For instance, if you're less agreeable, using that reason alone if you're a female and you're less agreeable, to identify as that sex ignores every other aspect of what makes that sex different. It's not just agreeableness. Well, what about your interests? Are you more interested in people or things? Or also, the category of sex is just the presence of a Y chromosome. So of male is the presence of a Y chromosome. So there's really no reason to try to do that. Just understand the differences that you're trying to associate here individually. You don't need to say or to force this generalization when you can just use the description of what you're trying to talk about, like personality. If I'm more agreeable, then I just state that. I just act it out, and people see that of me, because I can also lie or be mistaken. I could say I'm more disagreeable, but when it comes to most people around me, I'm actually really agreeable. So there's a relative perspective here of this true dichotomy that people just aren't. They're just ignoring. Like, it doesn't matter what I think compared to my experience of what I see other people. It matters what other people perceive me as. Because me just understanding that I'm a disagreeable or agreeable person, or I want to be, or whatever it is, doesn't matter, because it's all about how other people perceive me. There's a little bit of what you perceive yourself as, and where you want to head towards. But for the most part, when it comes to how you interact with other people, it's going to be up to them how they judge you and how they interact with you, and how you interact with them is up to you. So, because someone could just choose to leave and not talk to you or associate with you, etc., etc. So throughout this article, I will attempt to draw many of the binary categories and spectrums we're dealing with when it comes to attempting to separate them for the purposes of a better categorization or a more truthful one. So, in saying that this binary is strictly tied to this spectrum in this way, we're losing the nuance of the spectrum. And to say that the spectrum is tied to the sex in this way, we're losing the nuance of sex. So it's like you want to have them distinct separate categories, and you can see how the differences in the spectrums manifest as a result of the differences of sex. That's fine. But when you start to go top down and try to say these, I can actually simplify these infinite binary spectrums, and either side I just take it and map it onto one of the sexes, that's where you get a categorization error, and it becomes very inaccurate. And that's what a lot of people are attempting to do, is that they see the differences between the sexes while simultaneously saying there is no difference between the sexes because I can be this sex and identify as the other sex. So I'm aligned with this other sex, but I also define part of the category of what it means to be this sex. So if I'm male, even if I'm all the way on the highest agreeable end of the male spectrum, and that was the only thing we use to identify as male or female, or man or woman, then it's still a categorization error because you fall in the category of male, and the data that manifests as a result of your personality is just on the extreme end of that spectrum. And that's fine. You're just more feminine, or you're more agreeable. Like if you want to just categorize as feminine is associated with the traits that typically manifest as a result of the female, it's fine, because look what you're doing. The feminine can be extracted out of this other concept. But if you lose this other concept, then you lose the meaning of this other thing anyways. So you have to have them as two distinct concepts, where it's feminine is the manifestation of these archetypes, or in masculine is the manifestation of these archetypes. But they're still the biological markers that are relevant. So, gender as a defined in gender ideology is an attempt to force binary categories to exhibit the extremes of true dichotomies or spectrums that encompass personality, morality, behavior, interests, and roles. These all may align more with a particular sex when you categorize them this way, but to categorize them all this way is a generalization or a stereotype. So even though some of them, like the biggest one we know of, again, is that of interest. So between males liking things more, or in being more interested in things, females are more interested in people or beings. And that's why they go into the fields that they go into. And that's part of the manifestation in behavior. And let's see. And to say that, like, let's say we made the generalization that only women are nurses. Well, this would be just a wrong category, because there are feminine men who do also care about people, and they don't fall perfectly into that category of male, or what we would typically associate with male. And that's okay, because what we understand to be the difference isn't that they're female or that they identify as a woman. It's that they have a more feminine characteristic in this way. So when it comes to interest, they are more feminine, that they enjoy interacting with people more than they do interacting with things. And that is just one category that defines people, because they could be a very disagreeable male and still have more interest in people. So these are mutually exclusive, though interdependent in some way, in many levels of analysis. But it's a categorization error to say that it's just one way or the other, or like it's just an absolute. So in summary, they attempt to reduce spectrums into binary categories of sex. This is a post hoc rationalization or categorization. So they're saying, because these manifested differences are the result of sex, you can also take there to be, if you align with more or closer to the differentiation, you can go backwards and identify with that sex. And that's what gender theory tries to do, is say, well, here's how they manifest. And they manifest on these two bell curves. So if you lie closer to this bell curve, then you could backwards rationalize or categorize yourself into the sex. And they try to, like, if you don't do that, then what you have is arbitrary definitions, which we're going to get into later. But if you do not tie gender to sex, then you will logically, if you're trying to be genuine and serious, you will eventually get back to either to sex, or you will get to an arbitrary definition that you can define both genders as. And we're going to go over that. I'm going to show you I literally argued with ChatGPT and backed it into a corner to get it to say these things. So you'll see, because you align with the opposite sex's personality, interests, and roles does not make you that sex. It is okay to have personality that aligns with what we would typically consider to be the female perspective or male perspective. But we do not need to create a rationalization for it, because we have all these categories that we understand to be the differences that result in these things. And obviously what basically identifying as a man or a woman does is just give you a simple category based on heuristics, based on generalizations and stereotypes, that gives other people, it reinforces the stereotypes. So it gives people an inaccurate representation of what you're identifying as, because you don't even understand it. It's just a feeling you have. So there's no understanding of yourself actually underneath it, because in order to convey what you're trying to tell the people, that you have to go off of what they conceive of what you're talking about. So then you'll have to inform them of what you actually mean by that, which means you're informing them of your interests and you're going to tell them all the things that you were going to tell them anyways. So in the process of telling someone what you meant by when you identified as a woman, you're just going to define your personality and these other characteristics, your interests, your obviously expression can be part of it, but it's an oversimplification that you're going to need to rectify anyways. So it doesn't do anything for anybody. And it's really just, I don't even understand how you can be this simple. I mean, I can't actually. It's the left hemisphere, but that goes over in my other videos. You just simplify things to what you think and explain it all. Guess what? That's gender theory for some people. So just because if you aim properly, people will accept you. And that's an example of Blair White. Like, there's so many people that accept her for who she is, and there's some people that can't get past it because of their religious, dogmatism or anything like that. But she's aiming in the right direction. She wants to look at truth, and she's trying to get as close as she can to it while still trying to stay true to her how she feels about things. But she understands sex is a binary and that gender is tied to sex inextricably. So when you understand that, then you understand that the only thing that manifests these differences is sex. So if we didn't have either sex, we just reproduced asexually, we'd all be exactly the same. So sex is the reason why we all are different. And you could say that even if you were asexual, there's environments that would make you different over time in like terms of personality, etc. But it's hard to conceive of all the nuances that would result of that, because we probably wouldn't even be multicellular social beings if we didn't have sex. But when you identify as, they have to point to sex characteristics without naming specifics of the characteristics. So, yeah, this is what I was talking about, the arbitrariness. Okay, so typical definitions of gender theory and the definitions of either gender. So, the typical definition of men or man is an adult human male. And then in gender ideology or gender theory, someone who believes that they align with the roles, personality, behaviors, interests, and expression of the male archetype. So I did my best to formulate this in the most like steel man position I can. And the opposite is the definition of woman. So woman is an adult human female. In gender ideology, someone who believes they align with the roles, personality, behaviors, interests, mannerisms, and expression of the female archetype. Obviously, that's just all there is that's different. So the female archetype. So again, you're using male as the archetype for what your gender identity is. So when you have sex as a characteristic or a category, all you're saying is, okay, now we have a new formulation of what this means. So we have male, and then what are those roles, personality, behaviors, interests, and mannerisms that you're saying give you this categorization that aligns you with this sex? So then what people are going to be forced to do is tell you their personality, tell you their roles, tell you their behaviors, interests, and mannerisms, and it's going to force them to stereotype or generalize or do something that they would consider sexist, which is why they can't say it. All they can do is have a circular definition of a man is a man, who's someone who identifies as a man, or a woman is someone who identifies as a woman, etc., etc. So as soon as they acknowledge that they're going to generalize, stereotype, and be sexist, then we can move forward, because then you could say, well, at least you're being consistent, and at least what you're saying makes sense. So next, we just defined it. So fundamentally, the gender theory movement is one that aims to improve the care and reduce the harm of a minority group by giving them the ability to identify as the gender they desire and that they believe aligns with their identity. So this is the best possible group of people using it for a social reason. And obviously what we're going to separate here is those who do it for medical reasons or have a mental disorder. Like if you're actually gender dysphoric or have gender dysmorphia, I'm separating those people out because what I see is those people are going to be held, or we're going to figure out the medical aspect and how to treat these people, and eventually we'll figure that out. But when it comes to the social aspect, the social contagion, the people who are doing it to get social credit, there's some people who are doing it because they believe it aligns better with who they are as an individual, and those are the two other categories. So the people that are doing it for social reasons or disorder reasons. So I separate those people. People who are doing it for social reasons, I separate them into two further categories, where one is people who do it as a better way to understand themselves, and then those who do it for social credit. And obviously you can have some overlap between the two, because somebody can do it for social credit and it be a social reason. So there's a little bit of overlap between them, but those are the two categories I see that I can separate them into and say, these are what they're doing it for. Not to say that there's not a lot of overlap between them. The number one thing in their way of their ability to reduce harm to transgendered people is the facts of biology and personality differences between the sexes. So, like I said before, they're attributing these binaries to spectrums, and then they're trying to say that you can categorize yourself based on these binaries into these specifics. The sex chromosomes X and Y facilitate the differences between the sexes. So really it's just the Y chromosome. Girls like people, boys like things. These differences of choice and preference have increased in countries that have gone further than any to eliminate the cultural differences between men and women. So obviously some of the preferences in jobs, some of the interests, and the results that manifest as a result, we have done a lot of like the best and most repeatable experiments have been run in the most egalitarian countries to see whether or not being more egalitarian, what influence it has on the differences in interests and all the differences that manifest in society. And what seems to be a very specific trend is the more egalitarian your country becomes, the larger the differences in choices and outcomes are when it comes to men and women. So when you let people manifest who they are as an individual and stop trying to put pressure on them to be a certain way, their biological differences increase. So women are more tending to go into these fields that are oriented around people, and men and males are more oriented to go into jobs and categories and careers that revolve around things. So there's an obvious biological difference that you cannot change. It's not the result of us programming people or getting them to think a certain way in our societies. Like the evidence shows that that's the opposite, that people are, the way we're forcing people is to be more the same. And in fact, when you stop forcing people to be the same, you allow their differences to manifest and maximize, and then you get the differences. This means that the differences between men and women are not just societal, are in fact inversely correlated to where decreasing one increases the other. So if the only means to change someone from a male to female is by mutilating their genitals and hormone therapy, then why do we need this for the rest of our lives? Okay, so what I'm trying to say here is that if there are particular differences between people that are self-identified in our minds of who we are as an individual, why do we need to change our bodies and our hormones if we already believe we are who we are? So there's no reason to change anything, because changing it just changes your hormones. It makes you unhealthy. It ruins your homeostasis that your body is trying to maintain. And as a result, you're going to have a lot of complications just in hormone therapy. And why do you need to do things that will have a very detrimental permanent outcome if you already believe what you are? You don't need to affirm it, and it's only going to be unhealthy physically for you to do so. Now, whether or not it's unhealthy mentally, people are arguing against that. But I highly disagree with anybody who argues that it's healthy for you, and especially over the long term. But this is something that's going to bear out in a lot of the data, especially in those who are making rash decisions to do the extreme of body mutilation, but also the hormone therapy, because a lot of it's irreversible. But I'm really saddened by a lot of the people that are going to end up being harmed by this, and we'll see what happens. But the lack of ostracization, the lack of ostracizing those who do not have offspring and expecting those who do not want to adopt the responsibility of being a family means that there is no higher willingness for people who have children, because they do not feel as if they are being pushed to take responsibility on. This leniency cannot be mistaken as clear complacency and will drive population collapse. So I'm going over population collapse right here. Doesn't have too much to do with gender, but this gender ideology is leading to people taking on less responsibility, having less children, because people are getting confused at what your roles are. What are the differences between males and females? People ask, well, now that everybody's becoming, like, males are becoming more feminine as a result of us, as a society, not only accepting it, but pushing it and, what can you say, incentivizing people to do these things and to play along with this game, then you're going to get a lot more males who are more feminine, and then a lot more females who are masculine. And in doing so, yeah, people are going to become more the same, but it's going to result in things that we do not want as a society, like less females are attracted to less males, and less males are attracted to less females. But man, it's just a terrible concept. Like, just every level analysis, I don't understand. All right. Anyway, sorry. Those who want to transition can do so, but telling society that they're wrong for others not adopting this mantle of responsibility and continuing 4 billion years of unbroken legacy means the downfall of many bloodlines. So if you're not doing all this, if you're not trying to align yourself with what's attractive to the opposite sex, then you're going to end up in this situation where you are the result of 4 billion years of evolution. Like, there is an unbroken chain going back billions of years that has resulted in you in your current state. And now, because of your selfish egotism and need for gratification and moral high ground, you're going to adopt this very self-centered identity and then force it upon the world, become less attractive to the opposite sex in the process, and likely not have children. And then when you don't have those children, you're going to basically, your bloodline's going to end with you. And that's the result. That's 4 billion years of unbroken evolution, which is going to cease. So over 4 billion years. It's crazy. Okay. So and I agree that, and I believe that these people are committing passive genocide that propagate this information to people. So, and many of these young people are just sexually confused, or they're going through puberty and they have a confusion of their identity and who they are, and they're going through all these hormonal changes and these physical changes. So this is like the most complicated time in a person's life, and the time where they're the least grounded in reality. And it's the time that they're obviously gonna have, especially females, the most dissonance with their, or dissociation, I could say, with their body. And that's when they're most vulnerable to this theory and this ideology, because they're going to see it, and they're going to see it as a way to identify themselves, and it's a way to get social credit, and it's a way to get accepted by people, etc., etc. But yeah, there's all these young people who are sexually confused, and they think transgenderism is based on a few things, like I like cars, therefore I'm a female, therefore I'm a man. Like, it's very simple analysis, and it doesn't correlate with reality. But many teenagers falling victim to it. And once you accept, like, okay, I am this because I have these particular traits. Like, if I am a male and I accept that I'm actually a woman because I don't know, I do laundry sometimes. then the next logical step is like, well, what do I do to either affirm that or live more closely to that? Then I would take certain hormones, and then eventually I get to the point where I was like, okay, now I feel more comfortable with this and I'm more aligned with it. Why not just go through all the way through and do the sex, the physical characteristics, and change myself physically to align with that. So this is kind of a snowball. But having reproductive speech all at once say that procreation isn't just right because it's natural means the destruction of our species. But okay, I went way too in depth with that, but that's what it kind of results in. So number 2 thing is in the way of the ability to reduce harm in transgender people is the harm it is causing actual people with the mental diagnosis of gender dysphoria and gender dysmorphia. It's causing them because they're normalizing it. Like, think about what's happening to those who have this illness. People are treating it as if it's almost like everyone identified as having schizophrenia and people were affirming it. It's like, well, I think there's people in the wall, and then another person says, yeah, you're right, and there are people in this wall right here. And you know what we're going to do to help you identify more as a schizophrenic? We're going to lobotomize you. We're going to change your brain in a way that makes you actually more schizophrenic. And then they do that thing. And you're like, well, I'm getting all this social credit. People are accepting me. People are telling me that schizophrenia is the right way to live my life. And I can identify as having schizophrenia. So go ahead and confirm that delusion that I'm having and help me align with it. That's what gender confirmation does. And it's just a misguided misunderstanding of reality. So those who are men who identify as women because they like to bake muffins means that they're doing it based on gender roles or behavior, which is different than how someone feels inside. So if it's how you feel inside, how is it that it's how your behavior manifests? This is where it gets so confusing. It's like they don't separate any of these things. They're just like, they're all interchangeable. It's like I can feel a certain way inside and act completely different on the outside. And then it's like, well, those things are very strongly linked. So don't go thinking that like a lot of these aspects are attributed so easily to one thing or the other. Because like if you think about it, like if a man lives alone, like a male, then he's going to do a lot of things that you would typically think are female. He's going to have to do his own laundry. He's going to have to do all these things, like make his own food. So how is that? Is he a woman now? Because he's taking care of these things in his own right? No, it makes no sense. So, oh God, it's so confusing for no reason. So you can go and do this infinitely with everything. But yeah. I'm just going to skip all that. I feel like a lot of that is yet to be fully thought out. Oh yeah, one more thing. So the number 3 thing in the way of their ability to reduce harm to transgender people is the definitions and arbitrary nature of the term gender. Gender is a term contrived of an experiment in the mid-1960s where John Money encouraged gender reassignment of Bruce Reimer, who was brought up as the opposite gender for his entire life. So he was a male who was brought up in gender theory as a girl. So he was a male boy who was brought up as a girl for his entire life, and because of what happened, so they had a botched circumcision where they burn off most of his penis, and what they decided to do is just, if not all of his penis, they decided to raise him as a girl. I don't remember if they had to give him a surgery after to make it look more like it or whatever. The bottom line is he didn't have a penis or functional testes anymore or anything like that. So they brought him up as a girl. And over time, this kid, he didn't align with what they were trying to get him to align with, which was to say that there's nothing but a cultural aspect to whether or not a girl likes certain toys. And they thought this. They thought that they can teach this boy to like girl toys just based on how they raised him. And this was John Money's experiment. but he didn't. The boy ended up liking like trucks and all these other boy toys, and eventually he grew up and like he was interested in girls, and he was interested in, he was more masculine. He wanted to play sports. He wanted to do all these typically masculine things, and his parents didn't let him because of John Money. And eventually he went on to commit suicide. And there's a lot more to the story than that, but that's the gist of what happened. And this obviously isn't an argument for whether or not gender is a way to perceive or categorize people, but it is a very good starting point to understand how awful people are. So, he encouraged gender reassignment. Yep. The entire idea of gender is that gender norms, roles, and behaviors are all based on nurture, and none of them are caused by nature. That's what he was trying to say. It's a blank slate theory. I forgot what it's called. Tabula rasa, maybe. Because the term sex and gender become intertwined, or the definition of gender becomes arbitrary, that means they are inseparable. So, again, if you do not tie gender directly to sex in some way, the definition will become arbitrary. In other words, you will be able to put in the place of this definition a lot of different words. So I will be able to put man or woman in the same place and come to the same conclusion, which means you're not defining anything. And then also, you'll be able to put things there like personality, interests, all these other categories that we've been defining and laying out. So if you do that, then you understand that gender is just a completely arbitrary categorization when it comes to gender theory. Obviously, when it comes to the original definitions of adult human female and adult human male, it's very solid. But if we were an asexual species, we'd all be identical. I already made this argument. This would not be an issue until the theory became convoluted and was not actually tied to anything making the term gender arbitrary. This means that there's no difference between men and women. How can we separate the two? This led to eventually tie personality traits of masculinity and femininity to each gender, but the only reason the two genders have fallen to where they are is due to the biological roles each of us have played throughout time in our evolutionary history. Women were the caretakers and men were the providers and protectors. So, this is one of the things I thought about, and I was like, there's really two ways or goals accepted. These are the two ways you can diagnose and remedy the situation when it comes to those who actually have gender dysphoria or gender dysmorphia. So you can either become mentally congruent and change everything like your physical body to match your mental state, or you can change your mental state to match your physical body. And those are what people are trying to affirm. But I argue that those are both bad, and what you should just normally do is try to get this person to align with truth as much as possible, and don't try to force anything on them or affirm anything. Just walk them through how to be a person, like a human being. Stop trying to put them in these categories and just walk them through what we found is the best way to look at life. Like, stop looking at these categories and trying to identify with them or as them, and just try to be your best self. That's it. So I've gotten ChatGPT to admit the arbitrary nature of ideology. I made it loop the definitions every time it referenced female, woman, or femininity, when the definitions of femininity made references to female or woman. In doing so, it eventually became to two very arbitrary definitions that are interchangeable between the two genders. Okay, so woman, an individual who self-identifies. This is one of ChatGPT's definitions. A woman is an individual who self-identifies with a gender identity that is central to their personal experience and understanding of themselves. Now, if you look at this, what can you put in this place? You could put man right there. So a man is an individual who self-identifies with a gender identity that is central to their personal experience and understanding of themselves. This shows you the arbitrary nature of the definition. And I had it do this again after it tried to wiggle back towards sex again. I told it to do this again, and it came back to this one. So it's a slightly different variation. The only change is that it says that they understand to align with their personality experience and internal sense of self. So they kind of use the other one that a lot of people like to use. So the meaning of this is that woman can be used interchangeably with the term man, and also many other concepts fall into this definition, such as individuality. You can put individuality here, and it would be like, yep, that's how that turns out. Personal experience, consciousness, ego, and many others. So your ego is someone who identifies with an identity that they understand to be aligned with their personal experience and internal sense of self. Like, yeah, that's what an ego is. Consciousness, individual with that identifies with their identity that understand that aligned with their personal experience and internal sense of self. Consciousness, personal experience, etc., etc. Obviously, if you have to take out the word gender, but her gender identity, because that's a specific thing. But it's also not specific, because gender is a woman and woman is this thing. So it's like it's another circular definition. It's like, well, now you're using what is a gender. Genders are men and women. And then what is a woman? A woman is someone who identifies as gender. So it's another circular definition. So that's why you could just take that one out. When pressured to come up with a definition that cannot be used interchangeably with each gender, I was given this. So I was like, hey, your definition is basically, I can use man in this definition. We all get that. So it tried to do this again, and what it came up with was an individual who identifies with a gender identity that aligns with their internal sense of self and personal experience, recognized within their cultural context as a distinct from other gender identities. And it gave the same exact definition for man. So what this leads me to conclude is that all rationality and logic has been exhausted by ChatGPT in this case. It's gotten to the very essence of what is possible in this rationalization. It cannot go any deeper. So when it's done this in both of these or all four of these definitions, they have gone as far as they can in order to make this rationalization a reality and true. So if you look at this, an individual who identifies with a gender identity that aligns with their internal sense of self and personal experience, recognized within their cultural context as distinct from other gender identities. Well, what makes this distinct? There is no distinction here. Your distinction is your definition. And if your definition is the same for every category within this categorization, then there is no distinction. So you cannot distinguish man from woman if they're both defined exactly the same. This leads me to conclude it exhausted all rationalization and logic. So that is everything to do with gender. And I appreciate you guys watching, and I hope you guys can comment on it. Obviously, this isn't a perfect document. I took a lot of my different documents that I had and smashed them all into one, because I was talking about sex in one, I was talking about gender in one, I was talking about personality, interests, and all the different things that manifest as a result of individual differences and then sex differences. So I was like, well, I can put all these in one paper and then it'll just make sense. But now I have kind of a bunch of all of them, but I still need to refine some things. Like when you saw in gender, like there was some stuff that I was incomplete or not fully fleshed out, but the general concepts are how I've elaborated on verbally. So this is the this is the understanding of the differences between sex and gender that you should have, is that sex is unchangeable and it stays with you for your entire life. And gender is something that it makes no sense as a category because it's trying to do too many things at once. It's trying to be both a binary category and a series of spectrums. So you can't be a binary and spectrums at the same time. But that's what they're trying to do. They're like, yeah, right, I can be I can be this binary, but I can also be these spectrums, and these spectrums can fit on these binaries, and it just doesn't work, man. And we just need to stop trying to do it. We need to understand that the differences are a manifestation of sex, is some of the difference. It counts for some of the difference, but is not the reverse, where these categorization or differences are all the result of these binary categories in which people can identify however they like. So in my next video, I'm going to go over the categorical differences that people are trying to force in these binaries. And there are things like moral foundations theory, personality, your interests, which are encompassed by the sexual differences in interests and behaviors. But this is supposed to be behaviors and roles as a category. So interest is just supposed to be tangible and abstract. But I appreciate everyone watching, and I hope you learned something, because that's what I'm aiming to do. Is I'm aiming to learn with everybody, because I'm learning stuff, but I also learn while I talk. Sometimes I say things I'm like, wow, I never thought of that, while I'm talking, even in these videos. But I appreciate your guys' time, and I really do hope that we can all get to truth. And that's what I'm aiming for. So if anybody else wants to add to this, I really would like. I might even, I'm gonna make it. I have a Discord channel, and I'm gonna put that in the description below as well, so everyone can join in and we can have discussions. So I hope that we can build a community together, and one that is aiming up and that's trying to synthesize things rather than break them apart. So let's bring people together in a way that's true of reality. And I think that's what's going to manifest the best of us. Thank you all. I love you. And I'll talk to you guys next time.